The aliens had watched Earth for 30 years. They sent their ships to observe. They studied human cities, human farms, and human families. They listened to human music and read human poetry. And after all that time, they made a decision. Humans were harmless. The Veloth Confederation was a group of 12 alien species who controlled a large part of the galaxy. They had powerful weapons and fast ships. They had fought many wars and won most of them. When they looked at humanity, they saw something strange. They saw a species that preferred to talk instead of fight. They saw people who planted gardens on new planets instead of mining them for metals. They saw artists and teachers and doctors. Ambassador Una was the human representative at the Confederation's central station. The station was called the Nexus, and it was bigger than most cities. Thousands of aliens lived and worked there, making deals and signing treaties. Una walked through its halls every day, always smiling, always patient. She was a small woman with kind eyes and a soft voice. When the insect-like Kreth demanded unfair trade agreements, Una did not argue. She negotiated. She found middle ground. When the tall, gray-skinned Morven laughed at human technology and called it primitive, Una did not get angry. She invited them to visit Earth and see human art museums instead. The aliens liked Una. They thought she represented her species well. Peaceful, accommodating, weak. In the diplomatic meetings, Una sat quietly while other species argued about territory and resources. The Kreth wanted more mining rights. The Morven wanted control of trade routes. The small furry Bellocs wanted protection from larger species. Everyone wanted something, and everyone was willing to threaten war to get it. Humans wanted very little. They asked for fair trade. They offered medical technology and agricultural knowledge. They proposed cultural exchanges and scientific cooperation. The other species found this amusing. What kind of civilization didn't want to expand and conquer? A weak one, they decided. A species that had gotten lucky and stumbled into space travel. A species that would never be a threat to anyone. Captain Do-hyun watched these meetings from the back of the room. He was not a diplomat. He was a soldier, though his official title was Security Liaison. He commanded the HSS Resolve, a ship that the Confederation's records listed as a humanitarian response vessel. Do-hyun was not a soft man. His face carried scars from battles fought long ago, back when humans still fought each other. The Pacific Unification conflict had lasted 7 years and killed millions. Do-hyun had been 19 when it started and 26 when it ended. He had seen things that still visited him in his dreams. Now he was 53, and his hair was gray at the temples. He stood in the shadows of alien conference rooms and watched his species being underestimated. He said nothing. He smiled politely when aliens spoke to him. But his eyes never stopped watching, and his mind never stopped calculating. The Confederation's military analysts had studied human capabilities carefully. They noted that Earth had no large war fleet. Humans kept only 40 ships in service, and all of them were classified as peacekeeping or humanitarian vessels. Human colonies had no military bases. Human soldiers numbered only in the tens of thousands, and most of them worked as police or emergency responders. The analysts ran their simulations. In a war between humanity and any major Confederation species, humans would lose within weeks. Their ships were too slow. Their weapons were too weak. Their numbers were too small. These reports were shared openly. The Kreth read them and felt superior. The Morven read them and lost interest in humanity entirely. Even the smaller species, the ones who feared everyone else, did not fear humans. Una knew about these reports. She had read them herself. Sometimes, late at night, she sat in her quarters on the Nexus and allowed herself a small smile. The aliens were so confident in their analysis. They had counted human ships and human soldiers. They had measured human weapons and human defenses, but they had not understood human history. Back on Earth, in a bunker beneath the mountains of Korea, General Subin reviewed the same reports. She was an old woman now, with white hair and a face lined by decades of service. She had fought in the same war as Do-hyun, though they had been on opposite sides. Now they served the same cause. Subin looked at the Confederation's assessment of human military power and shook her head. They had counted the peacekeeping fleet. They had not counted the ships hidden in asteroid fields, disguised as mining vessels. They had counted the active soldiers. They had not counted the veterans, millions of them, scattered across human space, living quiet lives but never forgetting their training. They had seen humanity's kindness and assumed it meant weakness. They did not understand that humans were kind because they knew what they were capable of. Every smile from Ambassador Yuna was a choice. Every peaceful negotiation was a decision to hold back something darker. Subin closed the report and looked at a photograph on her desk. It showed a young woman in military uniform smiling at the camera. Her daughter, killed 20 years ago in the final battles of the unification conflict. Subin had sworn after that war that humanity would never fight again unless absolutely necessary. She hoped that promise would hold. But she also knew that somewhere in the galaxy, someone would eventually test humanity's patience. Someone would mistake kindness for weakness. Someone would attack human civilians and expect no consequences. On that day, the galaxy would learn the truth. Do-hyun returned to the Resolve after another long day of diplomatic meetings. His first officer, a young woman named Yoonji, met him at the airlock. "Anything interesting, Captain?" she asked. Do-hyun shook his head. "They still think we're harmless," Yoonji smiled. She had served under Do-hyun for 5 years. Before that, she had been a combat pilot in the unification conflict. Now she ran a small bakery on the station selling Korean pastries to curious aliens. But she still kept her flight suit in her quarters, and she still practiced in the simulators twice a week. "Good," she said. "Let them keep thinking that." The stars outside the viewport were beautiful and cold. Somewhere out there, beyond Confederation space, other powers watched and waited. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers that the peaceful aliens of the Confederation had never faced. Humanity had faced them. Humanity had faced itself. And humanity had survived. The gentle giants were not as gentle as they seemed. Haven was a beautiful world. It had blue oceans and green forests and mountains that touched the clouds. 400,000 humans lived there, spread across small cities and farming villages. They had built schools and hospitals. They had planted rice fields and apple orchards. Children played in parks while their parents worked and laughed and dreamed of the future. The Drath came without warning. The Drath Imperium existed far beyond Confederation space. They were conquerors. For 600 years, they had moved across the galaxy, destroying civilizations and taking slaves. They were tall creatures with gray skin and 4 arms. Their eyes were black and empty. They felt no pity and showed no mercy. Their scouts had found Haven 3 months earlier. They had watched the human colony and seen no warships, no weapons platforms, no military bases. They had reported back to their commanders. Easy target. 15 Drath. Dreadnoughts dropped out of faster-than-light travel above Haven on a quiet Tuesday morning. Each ship was massive, bristling with weapons capable of burning cities. The humans on the surface looked up and saw death filling their sky. Ji-woo was making breakfast when the first explosions hit. She was a teacher, 32 years old, with a 5-year-old daughter named Somi. Her husband, John-ho, worked at the water treatment plant on the other side of New Bizen when the ground shook and the windows shattered. Ji-woo's first thought was earthquake. Then she looked outside and saw the sky on fire. "Somi!" she screamed, running to her daughter's room. The little girl was crying. clutching her stuffed rabbit. Jiwoo grabbed her and ran. The streets of New Bizen were chaos. People ran in every direction. Buildings collapsed. Emergency sirens wailed. Above them, beams of light fell from the draft ships, each one destroying everything it touched. Jiwoo knew about the underground shelters. Every colony had them, built during the early days of human expansion when the galaxy was still unknown and frightening. She ran toward the nearest entrance, carrying Somi against her chest. Around her, people died. A beam struck a school, and it vanished in fire. An old man fell and couldn't get up. Jiwoo couldn't stop to help him. She heard screaming and crying and the terrible sound of Drath, weapons tearing the world apart. The bombardment lasted 6 hours. When it ended, half of Haven's cities were gone. The Drath had been careful not to destroy everything. They wanted slaves, not corpses. They wanted resources, not ruins. The ground invasion began at sunset. Drath soldiers marched through the burning streets of New Bizen. They expected surrender. They expected humans to fall to their knees and beg for mercy. That was what every other species had done. That was what weak creatures did when faced with superior force. They did not expect. Minjin was 67 years old. He had been a farmer his entire life on Haven. Before that, he had been a soldier on Earth, fighting in the unification conflict. He had promised himself he would never kill again. When the Drath soldiers kicked down his door, Minjun was waiting with a farming tool in his hands. It was meant for cutting crops. It worked just as well on alien flesh. He killed 3 of them before they shot him down. Across the colony, similar scenes played out. Teachers became killers. Doctors became warriors. Old men and women who had buried their violent pasts dug them up again. They fought with kitchen knives and metal pipes, and their bare hands. It was not enough. How can it be? 400,000 civilians against a professional military force. The Drath had armor and weapons and training. The humans had only desperation and rage, but they made the Drath pay for every street, every building, every life. In the underground shelter, Jiwoo held Somi and listened to the sounds of battle above. Other survivors huddled in the darkness, crying and praying. Some of them tried to organize a defense, but there were no weapons, no soldiers. Nothing but ordinary people facing impossible odds. When the Drath finally broke through the shelter doors, Jiwoo stood in front of her daughter and faced them. She had no weapon. She had no training. But she would not let them take Somi without a fight. A Drath soldier struck her across the face, and she fell. The last thing she heard before losing consciousness was Somi screaming for her mother. The battle for Haven ended 18 hours after it began. 280,000 humans were dead. The survivors, 120,000 of them, were loaded onto Drath transport ships. They would be taken back to the Imperium and sold as slaves. The news reached Earth 3 days later. Ambassador Yuna was in a meeting when her assistant interrupted with the report. She read it once, then again. Her hands trembled. Her face went pale. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. The Confederation responded with official condemnation. They proposed economic sanctions against the Drath Imperium. They scheduled committee meetings to discuss the situation. They expressed sympathy for the human loss. They did nothing useful. On Earth, in the bunker beneath the Korean mountains, General Subin received the news in silence. She looked at the casualty figures. She looked at the list of the dead, including women and children. She looked at the images of Haven burning. Then she picked up her phone and spoke 2 words. Activate Lazarus. Across human space, encrypted messages began to spread. Retired soldiers received calls in the middle of the night. Factory workers who had once been pilots reported to hidden facilities. Ships that had been disguised as cargo haulers began showing their true forms. The gentle giants had been wounded. Someone had killed their children and stolen their people. Now the galaxy would learn what happened when you made humanity angry. In a bar on Mars, a man named Minho put down his drink and stared at his phone. The message was simple. The call has come. Report to Station 7. Minho was 45 years old. He worked as a counselor at a local school, helping children with their problems. He was kind and patient, and everyone liked him. 20 years ago, he had been a combat medic in the bloodiest battles of the unification conflict. He had saved lives and taken them. He had watched friends die in his arms. He had thought those days were over. Minho finished his drink, paid his bill, and walked out into the Martian night. Somewhere out there, human prisoners waited to be rescued. Somewhere out there, the Drath believed they had won. They were wrong. The transformation began in secret. Across every human world, in hidden bases and underground facilities, humanity prepared for war. The Confederation watched with growing confusion. Their sensors detected unusual activity in human space. Ships were moving. Communications were encrypted. But nothing made sense according to their intelligence reports. Humans had no military. Humans had no weapons. Humans were peaceful. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. Captain Daoyun stood on the bridge of the HSS Resolve and watched his ship change. Panels in the hull slid open to reveal hidden weapon systems. Missile launchers emerged from compartments that had been disguised as cargo bays. The ship's engines, which Confederation analysts had rated as slow and weak, roared to life at their true power. The Resolve had never been a humanitarian vessel. It was a warship, designed to look harmless until the moment it needed to kill. All weapons online, Yunji reported from her station. Her voice was calm, professional. The baker who sold pastries to aliens was gone. In her place stood Lieutenant Commander Yunji, combat pilot, veteran of 37 engagements during the unification conflict. Do-hyun nodded. Signal the fleet? We move in 6 hours. The fleet. The Confederation had counted 40 human ships. They had missed the other 160 vessels hidden throughout human space. Mining ships that were actually destroyers. Agricultural transports that carried fighter squadrons. Research vessels armed with weapons that no one outside humanity knew existed. 200 warships. Crewed by soldiers who had spent decades pretending to be civilians. On Mars, Minho boarded a transport that took him to Station 7. The station orbited a small moon far from regular traffic lanes. Inside, thousands of veterans were gathering, putting on old uniforms, checking old weapons. Minho found his unit waiting for him. They had aged since the last war. Sergeant Hana had gray in her hair now. Corporal Taezong walked with a slight limp from an old injury. Specialist Yejin had loft lines around her eyes, but when they saw each other, the years fell away. They were soldiers again. Never thought I'd wear this uniform again, Hana said, adjusting her combat gear. None of us did, Minho replied. He picked up a medical kit and strapped it to his belt. The familiar weight settled against his hip like an old friend. But they took our people. They killed our children. No one needed to say anything more. General Subin addressed the fleet from the bridge of the HSS Reckoning. Her image appeared on every screen, in every ship, reaching hundreds of thousands of soldiers who had answered the call. 30 years ago, we ended our wars with each other, she began. Her voice was quiet but steady. We swore that humanity would never again raise weapons in anger. We became gardeners and teachers and artists. We chose peace. She paused, and her eyes hardened. The Drath did not give us that choice. They burned Haven. They killed 280,000 of our people. They took our survivors as slaves. And they did this because they believed we were weak. Around the fleet, soldiers listened in silence. Many of them had families on Haven. Many of them had lost friends, relatives, loved ones. Today, we show them the truth, Subin continued. We are not weak. We chose peace because we knew what we were capable of. Every day we spent being kind was a choice. Every moment we held back our strength was deliberate. She straightened, and her voice rose. They wanted war. They will have it. We will rescue our people. We will destroy their fleet. And we will teach the galaxy that humanity is not to be touched. The fleet roared its approval. Major Hyan led the ground assault teams. She was a small woman with short black hair and steady hands. During the unification conflict, she had commanded special operations units that struck behind enemy lines. After the war, she had spent 10 years in therapy, learning to sleep again, learning to live with what she had done. Now she was back. Her team consisted of 200 soldiers, each one a specialist in close-quarters combat. They trained constantly during the journey toward Draz space, running simulations, practicing formations, preparing for the mission. Our objective is the slave processing station orbiting the Drath homeworld, Hayam briefed her team. Intelligence suggests our people are being held in the lower levels. We go in fast, we hit hard, and we get our people out. A young soldier raised his hand. Ma'am, what about the Drath garrison? Hayon looked at him. What about them? Intelligence says there are 2,000 soldiers on that station. We're only 200. Hang smiled. It was not a kind smile. Then each of us kills 10. Any other questions? There were none. The journey to Drath space took 3 weeks. During that time, the Confederation sent messages demanding explanations. What were humans doing? Why were their ships moving toward hostile territory? This was unauthorized military action. Ambassador Yuna responded to each message with the same words. You had your chance to help. You chose committee meetings. We choose our people. The Drath Imperium received warning of the approaching fleet, but they did not believe the reports. 200 human ships. Impossible. Humans had no military. This must be a mistake, a sensor error, a trick. They sent 50 ships to intercept what they assumed was a small scouting force. Those 50 ships met Captain Do Hyun's vanguard at the edge of Drath territory. Do Hyun commanded 12 vessels against 50. By every standard of military logic, he should have retreated. Instead, he ordered his ships to accelerate directly into the enemy formation. The Drath commander watched the human ships approaching and felt confusion. Were they surrendering? Were they insane? Then the human weapons opened fire, and confusion turned to fear. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, 31 Drath ships were destroyed. Do Hyun lost 7, but the survivors pressed on without slowing. The message was clear. Humanity was coming, and nothing would stop them. In her cell aboard the slave transport, Jiwoo heard whispers from other prisoners. Something was happening. The Drath guards seemed nervous. Ships were fighting somewhere far away. She held Somi close and allowed herself something she had not felt since Haven burned: hope. The Drath Imperium had conquered 17 civilizations. They had never lost a war. Their military was massive, professional, and ruthless. For 6 centuries, they had been the terror of the outer galaxy. They had never faced humans who had nothing left to lose. Captain Do Hyun led his remaining ships toward the Drath homeworld. Behind him, the main fleet was still 2 days away. He had been ordered to wait, to regroup, to fight smart. He ignored those orders. Captain, Inji said carefully, we have 5 ships. They had at least 40 defending the planet. Dahin looked at the tactical display. His scarred face showed no emotion. Then, we don't fight their fleet. We go around them. The slave station is our target. It was a crazy plan. To reach the station, They would have to fly past the defensive fleet, survive their fire, and somehow dock with a heavily guarded installation. The chances of success were almost zero, but the slaves on that station were running out of time. Reports said the Drath were preparing to move them deeper into their Tory. Once that happened, rescue would become impossible. Set course for the station, Do-hyun ordered. Maximum speed. All power to forward shields. The 5 human ships accelerated. The Drath defensive fleet opened fire. Beams of energy streaked through space, striking human shields. The HSS Courage took a direct hit and exploded. The HS Honor lost its engines and fell behind. 3 ships remained. Do-hyun watched his friends die and felt nothing except cold determination. He had lost people before. He would lose more before this was over. The only thing that mattered was the mission. The 3 surviving ships reached the station and attached themselves to its hull. Drath security forces rushed to repel the boarders, but they were too late. Major Hayan was first through the airlock. She moved like water, flowing through the corridors of the enemy station. Her rifle fired in short, precise bursts. Drath soldiers fell before they could raise their weapons. Behind her, her team spread out, securing junctions and eliminating resistance. Lower levels, she commanded through her radio. That's where they're keeping our people. We push down, we don't stop for anything. The Drath garrison was 2,000 strong. They had defensive positions, heavy weapons, and knowledge of the station's layout. Against a normal enemy, they would have held easily. Humans were not normal. Sergeant Hana led her squad through a maintenance tunnel that the Drath had left unguarded. They emerged behind enemy lines and attacked from an unexpected direction. Corporal Taysom used explosives to collapse a corridor, trapping 300 Drath soldiers away from the fighting. Specialist Yijin hacked into the station systems and disabled the internal defenses. Minho moved with the assault teams, treating the wounded and keeping soldiers in the fight. He had forgotten how loud combat was. He had forgotten the smell of blood and smoke. But his hands remembered what to do, and that was enough. The fighting moved deeper into the station. Level by level, corridor by corridor, humans advanced and Drath retreated. The aliens had expected slaves to rescue easy targets. Instead, they found warriors who had buried their rage for 30 years and were finally letting it loose. HFY reached the detention level first. The doors were locked and reinforced, designed to hold prisoners inside. She placed charges and stepped back. The explosion tore the doors apart. Inside, hundreds of human prisoners looked up with terrified eyes. They had been beaten, starved, and broken. Many of them could barely stand. But when they saw the soldiers in human uniforms, something changed in their faces. "It's okay," Hayan said softly, her voice completely different from the commander who had just killed dozens of enemy soldiers. "We're here. You're safe now." Jiwoo was in the second cell block. When the soldiers reached her, she was holding Somi in her arms, shielding her daughter with her own body. She looked up and saw Minho's face above her. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. "My daughter," Jiwoo whispered. "Please help my daughter." Minho lifted Somi carefully, checking her injuries. The little girl was dehydrated and scared, but alive. He wrapped a blanket around her and smiled. "You're going home," he told her. "Both of you are going home." The evacuation took 3 hours. Human soldiers formed a protective corridor through the station, fighting off Drath counterattacks while medical teams carried the survivors to the docked ships. The original 3 vessels couldn't hold everyone, but the main fleet had finally arrived. General Sabin's ships swept aside the Drath defensive fleet in a battle that lasted 40 minutes. 160 human warships against 40 Drath vessels. It was not a fight. It was a message. Transports docked with the station and began loading survivors. The rescued prisoners, 118,000 of them, were taken to medical bays and given food, water, and care. The images were broadcast across the galaxy. Human soldiers, covered in blood and exhausted from combat, carrying alien children alongside their own. Warriors who had killed hundreds that day, weeping as they wrapped blankets around survivors. A species that had come to destroy, but also to save. Ambassador Yuna watched the footage from the Nexus. Beside her, representatives from a dozen Confederation species stood in shocked silence. "You did this," the Kreth ambassador whispered. "Your kind did this." Yuna nodded. "We did. We thought you were weak. We thought you were harmless." Yuna turned to face him. Her kind eyes were harder now, carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "We are not harmless," she said quietly. "We never were. We simply chose to be gentle. There's a difference." The Drath Imperium requested negotiations. Their mighty fleet was broken. Their slave station was captured. Human forces now orbited their homeworld, and more ships were arriving every day. General Subin accepted their surrender with no ceremony. There would be trials for those who had ordered the attack on Haven. There would be reparations for the survivors. There would be changes. The war was not over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. On the medical ship, Jiwoo sat beside Sami's bed and watched her daughter sleep. The doctor said she would recover. They both would, eventually. Outside the viewport, she could see the human fleet spread across space like a blanket of stars, protectors, avengers, her people. She had never been prouder to be human. The war lasted 8 months. When it ended, the Drath Imperium existed only in history books. Their great fleet was scrap metal floating in space. Their conquered territories were freed. Their leaders stood trial for crimes against 17 civilizations, including humanity. Human forces occupied the Drath homeworld, but they did not do what the Drath had done to others. They did not enslave. They did not destroy. Instead, they built. Medical teams treated Drath civilians who had been wounded in the fighting. Engineers repaired damaged infrastructure. Teachers began programs to help the Drath unlearn centuries of conquest and cruelty. It was not mercy. It was purpose. Humanity wanted to break the cycle of violence, not continue it. Captain Do-hyun was offered a promotion to admiral. He had led the assault that saved the prisoners. He had commanded ships in 6 major battles. He was a hero. He refused the promotion. "I've done enough fighting," he told General Subin. "Someone needs to help them become something other than conquerors." "I want that job." Subin understood. She signed the transfer orders without argument. Do-hyun became the first commander of the Human Drath Reconciliation Corps. His job was to help former enemies become something better. It was harder than any battle he had ever fought. But when he saw Drath children learning to read instead of learning to kill, he knew it was worth it. Major Haeam returned to Earth. She had killed over 200 enemy soldiers during the war. She had led the assault that saved 118,000 lives. She had earned medals and commendations and the respect of every soldier who served with her. She went back to therapy. "Doesn't help?" her therapist asked. "Knowing that you saved so many people?" Haean thought about it. "Yes," she said finally. "But it doesn't erase what I had to do. Nothing will ever erase that." She began working with other veterans, helping them process what they had experienced. She understood their nightmares because she shared them. She understood their guilt because she carried it. Nao returned to his school on Mars. His students didn't know what he had done during the war. They only knew him as their kind counselor who always listened and never judged. But sometimes, late at night, he would receive calls from former patients. Drath veterans now, struggling to understand a galaxy without war. He spoke to them in halting Drath, helping them find their way. "You were a soldier," one of them said to him once. "I can tell. How did you stop being one?" Minho thought about the question. "You never really stop," he admitted. "You just learn to be other things too. Better things. It takes time. How much time? As much as you need." General Subin retired from service. She was 73 years old and tired in ways that sleep could not fix. She had commanded the largest military operation in human history. She had won a war that everyone said was impossible. She returned to her village in the Korean mountains, the same place where she had been born. She bought a small house with a garden. She planted flowers and vegetables. She taught calligraphy to local children, guiding their small hands across paper. Sometimes people visited her, journalists and historians who wanted to understand the war. She answered their questions politely, but she never spoke about her own experiences. The past was past. The present needed her attention. Ambassador Yuna returned to the Nexus, but everything had changed. The aliens who had once ignored her now listened carefully to every word she said. The species who had laughed at human weakness now treated humans with careful respect. "You deceived us," the Morvan representative said during a council session. "You hid your true capabilities." Yuna shook her head. "We never lied. You saw what you wanted to see. You looked at our art and assumed we had no warriors. You saw our kindness and thought it meant we couldn't be cruel." She stood and addressed the full council. "Let me explain something about humanity. Our greatest artists are often people who have seen war. Our kindest healers are sometimes people who have caused terrible harm. We create beauty because we know ugliness. We choose peace because we understand violence." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We will always prefer peace. We will always try diplomacy first, but never, ever mistake that preference for inability. We held back our strength for 30 years because we chose to. If anyone threatens our people again, we will make the same choice we made for the Drath." The council was silent. The lesson had been learned. The Velith Confederation updated their official records. The entry for humanity now read, "Status: Active Civilization. Threat Assessment: Extreme. Behavioral Pattern: Preferential pacifism with demonstrated capacity for total war. Recommendation: Maintain positive diplomatic relations. Do not provoke." Beneath this official language, someone had added a personal note that became famous throughout the galaxy. "They are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. Not because of their weapons or their tactics, but because they genuinely prefer to be kind. Every act of human gentleness is a choice made by creatures who could just as easily choose devastation. Treat them well. They have earned it." Jiwoo returned to Haven with Somi. The colony was being rebuilt. New Bizin rose from the ashes, its streets filled with construction workers and planners and dreamers. She found the spot where her old house had stood. There was nothing left but scorched earth. Junho, her husband, had died in the attack. His name was on the memorial list, along with 279,999 others. Jiwoo cried for a long time. Then she wiped her tears and started planning her new home. Above the colony's central square, they erected a memorial. It was a simple stone pillar, carved with the names of everyone who had died. Beneath the names, there was a single inscription: "We chose peace. We will always choose peace, but never mistake our choice for weakness." Somi grew up in the rebuilt colony. She learned about the attack and the war and the rescue. She learned about the soldiers who had come to save her people and the price they had paid. When she was 18, she joined the Humanitarian Response Corps, the same organization that had once hidden warships behind peaceful names. But now it really was humanitarian. The weapons were still there, hidden and ready, but they had not been used since the Drath War. On her first day, a commander gathered the new recruits and gave them a speech. "You are not soldiers," she said. "You are healers and builders and helpers. That is your first purpose. But you are also the last line of defense for our species. If anyone threatens humanity again, you will become soldiers. You will fight. And you will win." She looked at each recruit, meeting their eyes. "Never forget what you are capable of. Never forget what our species did when pushed too far. And never forget why we choose peace despite that capability. We choose it because we know the alternative. We choose it because we have seen war and decided that love is better." Somi thought about her mother, who had shielded her with her own body. She thought about Minho, who had carried her to safety. She thought about all the soldiers who had come for her people when no one else would. She understood. The galaxy moved on. New alliances formed. Old enemies became friends. The Drath, guided by humans like Doyon, began building a new society based on cooperation instead of conquest. And humanity returned to their art, their gardens, their quiet lives among the stars. The soldiers put away their weapons and picked up their brushes and instruments and, children. They were poets again, but the scars remained. Not as wounds, but as reminders. Reminders of what they were capable of. Reminders of why they chose differently. The gentlest hands often carry the heaviest burdens, and the galaxy had learned to respect that truth.